TheMista, one game away from a showdown with Beastie QT himself.
Spawning in on the left side of the map on Lipany at match point is B with the Delhi in red, and on the right side that is going to be Mista playing as the French in blue. And as you pointed out, Mista might need to pull out something from the bag of tricks to be able to compensate for the seemingly considerable deficit that the French suffer from as compared to the Abbasids, but the Delhi on this map. Because this map with this civilization combination, if you just look at these as, you know, raw data numbers from a large amount of games being played, or just the civilization matchup and how it plays out, you would say that this matchup is Delhi favored. So the question becomes, how is Mista going to ensure that this matchup is not so much Delhi favored?
I think one way the French can insulate themselves is if they get a little bit of wiggle room around the sacred sites via 1 or 2 early outposts. Something they can be really good at is the TC boom. We know more and more players are loving to do it as the French right now, and I think this is one of the encourageable maps due to the fact you usually have a lot of natural choke points that you can easily defend because of the wood lines, because of the mountains, because of the stealth forest. And I think that's maybe part of the reason why the French, I believe, actually the highest win rate Civ here on Lipany. The time of recording, while the Delhi are lagging slightly behind by like 1 or 2 percentiles. But overall, like it's kind of hard to fully gauge the Delhi right now. I'd be curious to know what the pros' full kind of read is on it. Are they just bored of playing this Civ, or is there another reason why it gets neglected? Because when you look at pub play, it's the least played Civ. And I'm not talking like, you know, your Jill and your Jax at your standard kind of level. I'm talking pro level, like the top of the top play this Civ the least.
Yeah, part of the equation there is that for a long, long time, Delhi was so powerful in tournaments that people kept banning it in tournaments, and because of that, the pro players, the real pro players playing ladder, just said, there is no point for me practicing this civilization, because I wouldn't be able to use it on tournaments anyways, so might as well go for something else. And this is legit an approach that many players took. Like, in fact, I have heard pro players saying, oh no, my opponent is Delhi, it's annoying because I will have to practice a matchup that will never happen in a tournament.
It's true. Although, in fairness, I'd say more recently, people are moving their attentions. For a while, it was on the Mongols as like a standardized ban. And now, ever since we put custom maps in, people are thinking both HRE and Rus the most. French coming in third on the bans. But it's cool to see that dynamic in play.
I love it. I think
that's right.
This is, I think, a great showcase of the fact that it's not even necessarily the civilizations being unbalanced, it's the fact that, you know, on the maps that were available, specific civilizations were more powerful than the others. But once you start expanding the map pool, once you start diversifying the type of maps and the style of maps that you play and show in tournaments, suddenly a lot of civilizations become viable that were seemingly not really viable in the standard built-in maps of Age of Empires 4 that we have seen in the recent months.
I think it's the safety factor as well. Like I'm not saying that if you're a French, Rus, or HRE player, you're a simpleton. I'm saying it's simpler to like get a game plan online with, because I think they have like very good aggressive timings or good variability. Rus especially, like they're a very flexible civ, probably the most flexible civ in the game. The French are great tempo aggressive, so you can take control of the game from a very early stage. And of course the HRE, they're very difficult to block out of their castle age timing, especially on maps that people are unfamiliar with. And I think these edges put them ahead of your Delhis, or definitely your Abbasids, your English, these other civs that maybe have a lot more nuances and tighter timings that need to be figured out before they can become viable.
Yeah, TheMista said something very, very clever after the release of the game. I think we had an interview with him during Genesis. And part of the reason why Mista said that the French was so popular in that tournament, the first AoE4 tournament ever, is because all the bonuses that you have for the civilization apply automatically. You might not even be conscious about their existence, but you are getting them. The cheaper drop-off buildings, the villager production, and stuff like that. Using the same logic, you want civilizations for these new maps that you're familiar with, and those that have a lot of passive bonuses that are relatively straightforward and easy to understand and implement into new maps. And it's going to take a lot more time to figure out how to use more complex and more in-depth civilizations, or civilizations with much more complexity on these new maps, because the same way it took a lot more time to figure out how to use Delhi or Chinese on the built-in maps of tournaments in the early months of Age of Empires, it's also going to take more time to figure it out on the brand new maps that we are going to introduce in Road to Wololo.
Exactly. That's why we aren't really seeing Delhi picked at all on the custom maps yet. It's like there's some potential. I can maybe see them having some viability on a map like Frisian Marshes of the custom maps we use right now, but it's going to take time to develop that because it's a very nuanced civ. You've seen what happens when the game plan goes off-road even for like 30 seconds, you know? It's like you're just driving an old banged up Mini from the 80s and it just can't handle off-road. The moment you go off-road, like the axle breaks, the car breaks down. And that's this civ in a nutshell. We've seen what happens if you get blocked on your goal for 2 minutes. It's like the whole house is on fire. People forgot how to breathe, and they just die. The deli fall to pieces. And if you compare that to the French, like, oh, I'm off my gold. I've been forced off my gold. Like, I can still just go play Pocket Eco, no problem. Like, you know, I can go to my archers. Like, there's less reliance on these very tight timings around sacred sites or research speeds compared to the deli.
Now, what is Mista up to over here? Because right now he has 1 knight on the battlefield. He's been roaming the map with 2 scouts. Sanctity on the way for B. That 1 knight has been doing some damage when it comes to forcing idle time, but it wasn't really able to pick off many villagers. And you see, Mista is not moving on towards the second town center. He's not really moving on to even an archer range, which raises the question of what exactly Mista's game plan is here.
I wouldn't be surprised if he pulls villagers on the TC for the TC. Like, it seems really greedy, but you can get away with it in this map because usually the design of Lipany makes it much harder to dive your base. And realistically, the Delhi don't want to do that early on anyway because they don't have heavily armored troops compared to you. So that could be a play available to him, and he could still afford knights to push into the midfield because of the amount of like condensed eco near his base. If he was to go for extension TC, I think the cool way he could do it is towards the sacred sites to the north, where the deer and berry patch is, and that should allow him to keep pushing troops. But for now, it's just gonna be the knights. He'll try to probably build up to 4 to 6 and then split them up into the groups. And that's when it becomes annoying because B has to decide, do I guard at home or do I now move out for the sacred sites en masse?
Yeah, looks like Mista is going to start mixing in archers over here. So far, good old-fashioned knights and archers build over here. On the other side, though, once you see the horsemen arrive as well, alongside the spearmen, that's a combination that's very difficult to deal with knights and archers. We have seen that over and over again, that the flood of full melee units is hard to deal with when you have archers and knights, simply because it's so difficult to focus down those individual spearmen when you have like one massive melee battle going on.
Yeah, the bigger problem isn't as much that as the on top of that, there's these little head pads healing them up behind the scholars. And I think that's where this matchup can be quite skill-based, as opposed to this civ is just inherently stronger. If there's one civ that can actually, in small numbers, snipe out scholars, it's the French, because of how hard the French cavalry hit. Other civs struggle because they have to get to like 15 archers to be able to pep them down because piety makes them so ridiculously chunky to get through. But just a small quantity of knights sneaking through can quickly end your healing dreams as a Delhi player.
And that's how you have to play French. You have to keep your knights alive while also being very active and picking off the scholars. Dare I say it's more valuable to pick off these scholars walking for the sacred sites than picking off the villagers on berries, let's say, or the wood lines, because these scholars, these give you a tremendous amount of power as the Delhi, not just with the sacred sites, but also it's also about the fact that you are investing a ton of gold into them. They also will buff your research, and more importantly, if you let the Delhi player get to like 10 scholars when they reach Castle Age, they will be able to use that instantly to heal the elephants. So like, you want to keep those scholar numbers down, and for that you need to consistently pick off those scholars all across Feudal Age.
Yeah, I think it's even before elephants, though. If you get up to 7 or 8 scholars for free, we've seen what that does in a feudal battle.
True.
Like, it just allows you to efficiently trade without losing troops. So I think you're right, you have to snipe them out. There's definitely high value there. Your goal is to stop B reaching 7 to 8 scholars without some serious damage done. And you can see he's starting to stack up the knights to a point where they can actually combat even piety, but they need to shift around the fights, and this can be the weakness of the spears. You can't choose your fight because you're too slow in comparison to cavalry.
Yeah, but that's a lot of spearmen right now. Mista can't engage, and the concern I have for him is that he's not on a second town center, he just has knights and archers, and slowly but surely the Delhi is going to build up that critical mass, and we have seen that over and over again. The Delhi playing very defensively at the beginning, and then just suddenly flooding you with a bunch of horsemen and spearmen, and the time may have already arrived, because as you see, the Delhi flood is now moving out from that stealth forest, and suddenly Mista could find himself being overrun very soon.
We say that, but he's got spears in the mix as well, so the archers are going to be able to count this out. The scholars aren't in position, so this could be a good trade for Mista. It comes down to how he shifts around the fight. The knights need to back away, never engage with the spears, villagers off the front line.
Ooh, good fight.
More troops being pulled by B. The spears seem to be never-ending, but the knights, as long as they survive, Mista will be fine with this. They start to get over on the backside, though. The archers
looking
need
bad.
to back up.
Looking really bad, actually.
guess the Knights, but like this is the thing, the Knights live, but the Archers aren't up to Death Ball status. He has killed off a lot of the spears, and if he kites this out right, it'll still be good. But the problem is the Knights have to throw away their lives now. The villagers have to keep gathering because Mr. can't afford the idle eco, and it means that it's going to be an eco lead for B now in the coming minute.
And the thing is that offense is the best defense. By being aggressive, you ensure that you can control multiple sacred sites and Mista won't be decapping them because Mista is too busy fighting this. That's the benefit that you're really getting over here. Constantly maintaining the pressure on Mista's base means that the sacred sites will fall under your control. And it looks like there is a cleanup finally coming in here from Mista, but the numbers still looking better over here for B, 23 army as opposed to 14. And now B is going to have the power of 3 sacred sites fueling his war machine. This is looking grim for B, or Mista rather. This is looking really good for B actually.
It's looking grim for B. He has to play for longer. Oh, seriously though, it does look bad for Mista. And he lost all the Knights in the mix of that. Thinking back to how that fight went, that should have been a good fight for Mista, but it seems like he got over-fixated on protecting the Knights and didn't micro the spears. So he didn't have a front line to block the Horsemen charge in. That's where the Archers disappeared. If the Archers last 20, 30 seconds longer than they did, I actually think this is a good fight for Mista still. Especially if he can keep the Knights alive. But he wasn't paying attention to that detail, and it's why B is now able to flood out. And now you're reaching the critical mass point. That was the best time to take a fight. If you try to take fights now, there's 6 skulls available for B, and all of them will be available because they've already done their due duty of capturing the sacred sites. So now they're on healing duty.
They are on healing duty indeed, and the thing is that Mista doesn't have an insight into that stealth forest. He's playing this one semi-blind essentially. He does not know what's coming for him. He can't really approximate the amount of units that will flood his base very soon. Looks like he's going to decap one of those sacred sites, but B's gonna be more than happy sitting on 2, especially because he's just now finishing all the critical Feudal Age upgrades, and he can start thinking about Castle Age potentially. In fact, he might even stop the decap, and let's not underestimate the fact that there's a sacred site countdown going on, though. It's probably not going to be a major factor, but it's going to be something to keep in mind, especially if Mista can't decap a sacred site for the next, like, 3, 4, 5 minutes.
It becomes a big problem if you lose the next 2 fights, because the snowball effect will allow the Delhi to build up more. And then on top of that, you'll feel panic to go out and do something about the sacred sites. And that's when bigger and bigger mistakes can start to occur. But
I don't like this. These guys will be stranded.
How do they do anything as well? They'll kill like 2 villages max and pull back. B should have textiles as he's the Delhi.
Yep,
yeah,
he's got it.
Judging by how many shots they just tanked there, he definitely has textiles. Go back away. 2 villages will go down.
Oh no, it's just one. Okay, there's a second one.
Okay, he gets the final shot out. But like realistically, this isn't going to stop B. And now, as you said, he's stranded. Has to take a fight. He's forced to do so. Spearman catching up. Horseman trying to wrap around. Now, B is missing the main contingent. This is only a quarter of his available horsemen. He needs to get the rest of the fight now. This will end up being a good trade for Mista.
But he's raiding. Look at Mista's base. Mista is getting raided really hard. B is splitting up his forces because only this is going to be utilized for a cleanup. The rest of them diving on the lumberjacks. I don't know how many villagers got killed over here, but it's definitely distracting for Mista. And ultimately, he's still gonna get cleaned up. I like this a lot. You don't need to pull back everybody. Just pull back enough to clean up this up. And then you can push Mista's base. Mista knows he's going to call it. And B evens it out. We're moving on to a decider.
Yeah, kind of its expected outcome off that fight near the berry patch the Mista extended onto. I really think it comes back to that one. Like, looking back at that fight, genuinely, it did seem like an out micro by B. If he was able to guard those archers, I genuinely think Mista has a sure shot at, like, aggressing this and dragging the game later. And that's to your benefit. Like, a prolonged feudal where sacred site control isn't attainable works bad for the Delhi. But B, pristine micro, takes the most crucial fight, and then just starts to snowball from there. This is your classic Delhi, and it's exactly why we see it picked so frequently on Lipanese. If your opponent slips up in one fight, you can very quickly just take complete control of the game, because as long as your scholars aren't being sniped out, you're building up to free healthcare, and that is just unmatchable for practically every other civ in the game.